news, everyone? Pernak here. I've got another episode of Paper School. So let's go to class. Today's class will be on paper grain. So let's determine why that's important. As a printmaker, paper grain is not going to be truly important to you. You barely ever really have to look into it or recognize it. It really will not affect what you're doing. But for other people, it can be a very important thing. For the graphic designers, it could be very important. If you're making brochures or anything that needs to be folded or read, or anything having to do with books, if you're a bookbinder, or if you're putting together a pamphlet that's going to be bound, those types of things is where paper direction comes in super important. For the most part, as a printmaker, it is not, unless you're doing anything involving folding, creasing, and turning, like as in turning a page, those types of things. Those are what will be important for paper grain. So with different types of paper, have different types of grain, or it becomes more pronounced, I should say. So handmade paper is the paper with the least amount of grain or no grain. And why is that? When they make paper, they put that vat of slurry, which is chopped up paper or chopped up wood, or whatever else they're using, and their sizing or any other chemicals that they're using into the slurry of water and everything else. And they take what they call a decal. And a decal looks kind of like a window screen. It's a wooden frame with a wire mesh on it. And that mesh is dunked into the vat of water or paper slurry. And then that decal is lifted up out of the water like so. Now, if you have someone, and if you lift it up and you shake it around like this and the water comes out through the bottom and everything, it's not going to have much of a paper grain direction. Now, if you get someone who is going to shake it back and forth like this or this, that's when your paper starts to get a grain direction. And why is that? Well, in handmade paper, your paper grain is going to kind of look like this. As you can see, the grain points in all directions. And that's really what you want for no paper grain direction. You typically see that in handmade papers because it's just completely random where the paper fibers sit. And that's a good thing if you're doing things that don't involve paper grain direction. Now, mold-made papers, because they're made out of mold, and those molds are big giant metal cylinders. They're basically a cylindrical decal. It goes into the slurry and lifts out the paper. And it just does it that way. And then it deposits it onto a conveyor belt, and that belt goes off. Now, because of that nature of it, you do get a little bit more paper. All the little fibers of the paper start to shift and line up next to each other. Not completely. I mean, there are some mold-made papers that don't have a very pronounced paper grain, some more so than others. Depends on the machine made and the company, etc., etc. But typically, they have a grain direction. And it's because the fibers are starting to align, and they're starting to all travel in the same direction. Now, machine-made paper has the most pronounced, I should say, paper grain direction. Your paper grains could be more like this, where you see all the fibers starting to line up right next to each other. Or they might even be just straight, next to each other. So now that you understand that paper has a grain direction because the fibers are lining up next to each other, that's the direction. Now, when you take a standard typical sheet of paper, let's say this is 8.5 by 11 printer paper, paper can either run, the grain direction can run long ways or short ways. And you can determine that by 4 simple tests. And I'm going to show you those tests right now. As I stated, there are 4 different tests that you can use to determine paper grain. 3 of them are destructive to the paper. My preferred method is not. So we just have a standard sheet of printer paper right here. And I'm going to show you my preferred method last. Now, one of the things you can do to test paper grain is you can fold it in one direction. And as you fold it, you can feel the increase in that way. One way will be easier to fold than the other. To me, this is a hard way to determine. And I really couldn't figure out which way the paper grain direction is on this. It felt like long direction this way as opposed to short direction. So I don't really like that test. I find it not very good. Now, it probably would work better on, it does work better on some thicker papers because you can definitely tell which way it wants to fold better, but on a thin paper like this, didn't work so well. So like I said, 3 of these tests are destructive. We got 2 more to go. So here's the other one. So what you're going to do is just tear the paper in one direction and tear the paper in the other direction. Now, looking at this, as you notice, this tear was pretty straightforward. I could pull this straight down pretty easily. But when I did it on this side, it kept wanting to go this way. So, if I had to make a guess, I would say the paper grain does run long way. This way, because it's tearing so much easier. But as you notice, I destroyed this piece of paper. It's no good to me now. Another one, which can also ruin paper, is the last one. And this is getting your paper wet. So I just got a nice 1-inch wide brush here. I'm just going to slop on some water here. And I'm just going to wait for it to ripple. And I don't know if you can see it, but it's starting to ripple right here. And the rippling, I notice, is kind of going like this way. So that means the paper grain is running long direction on this paper because it's not going to curl, or it will either buckle or it'll curl or one or the others. So if you do like the corner right here, you'll notice the paper start to curl. Right there. And you notice the paper is starting to curl under itself. So grain direction runs long direction here. And while these are all the same, cheap printer papers, it does show you that it does make it easy to understand grain direction for that purpose. Now, this is the method I like the most. And this one does not destroy the paper, but you have to have a sensitive feel for it. Like so. So, what you want to do, this is what I do. I take one edge of the paper, I bring it to the other edge, and I kind of bounce it like this, as you can see. I feel the resistance. And as I feel that resistance in the paper, I can tell the paper wants it folds over on itself a little easier this way than it does this way. So it definitely runs long direction. And that's simple for something like this. So when you're looking at things with paper direction like this, you know that this is long direction. If you were making a brochure, you don't want to make your brochure where it folds this way and this way. You want to make it so it folds this way. So you have to find out which paper is going to work best for you. Most paper houses that work in commercial paper are going to tell you whether it's a long grain or short, or if it's long or short, or which direction the grain travels, because for people who do that, that's very important. It's also very important when it comes to books. Because if I were making a book, and let's say I fold this paper in half, like so, as the direction, as I'm turning pages like this, you want it traveling along, you want the way it goes like this way. So the paper wants to, stay flat like this. Now if you did it the other way, it makes turning the pages harder. And you do notice that with some books it is like this. I mean, it is much harder to turn this page this way than it is this way. And that's why paper grain is important for bookbinders and things like that. So here's the sketchbook I have. And so far it feels like it does want to go that way. But it could even be they did it wrong. But it is a bound book, so it should be bound according to the right rules. Your spiral bound one's less important because you're not folding it over on itself. You're just, it's a flat surface anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Let's take a look at a couple other papers too. So this is a paper I do like to use in printing. It's Strathmore 300. Take a sheet out here and find out which way this grain direction goes. Okay, that's long ways. It travels short on this one because this was so much easier to do than, as soon as I grabbed this I could feel it. The thicker the paper, the more you notice it. So this right here was not, it doesn't travel a long direction on this one, it travels short direction. And you should be able to apply that to almost nearly every paper as long as it's not a ply. Now this is Bristol, which typically can have a ply. Let's take a look at this one in Fabriano. Bristol is notoriously known to be a very tough, very thick, and very stiff paper. Mostly because it's Bristol and it's meant for illustrative purposes. So I have that there. It's really hard to tell on this. Okay. Nope, it's definitely short direction. Paper grain is traveling this way. And so that's paper grain. Let's go over a small little recap. So grain travels in a direction depending on the way the paper is made, whether it's machine made, mold made, or handmade. One has more paper grain than the other. Secondly, paper grain it either goes long way along the paper, long way, or short, depending on which way. So if it's short, the paper grain is traveling this way. If it's long way, it's traveling this way. And it's really only important for people who work with things that fold. So origami can be very important because origami has folds that go every direction. It's often made with washi paper, which is traditional handmade Japanese paper, or paper with no grain direction. That's important. Also things like your brochures, your books, and anything else that has to be folded or creased or anything like that, the grain direction matters. But as a printmaker, not so much. Unless you're doing something where it's going to be more physical, interactive, maybe a greeting card or something like that, you really don't have to worry about grain direction. And so that was class, everyone. I hope you all learned something, or at least enjoyed it. Remember, give me a thumbs up down below. That will help me out. If you have any questions regarding paper or anything regarding printing and that matter, post them down below. I will answer them. Remember, you can always follow me on my Instagram, my Tumblr, or my Twitter. Those links are down below also. Remember, you can also support me as an artist by visiting my Etsy shop and going and visit there. If you visited my Etsy shop before, I've just lowered my prices by $5 for a majority of my prints. So if it helps you and you thought, oh, if it was $5 less, I would buy it, hey, now it's $5 less. Until next time, everyone, bye.